Yeah. Okay. So at 7:45, I want to apologize to people who might be watching live. Also, my phone in my laptop is creates a tinny kind of effect. I thought I could solve that problem by streaming from my iPhone, but YouTube tells me today that they changed their policy for how they live stream mobily, and that I need, no, not just me, but anybody who has a channel on YouTube qualify to stream mobile phone. So I'm not a Hollywood star. So I think I have 5 subscribers. So if we want to do a campaign to get 995 more subscribers, we'll do that. In the meantime, we're stuck with this laptop for a little while. It's possible that I'll change to an iPad as my go-to laptop. It's not a commercial for Mac. I'm not being paid by them. But if Mac is listening in and wants to provide me with a free iPad, I wouldn't deny it. And so, okay. I was telling people before Minion, and this is just funny, just in terms of the use of my iPhone, and that I'm pretty. I wouldn't say I'm technologically advanced with it, but there was a session at the Israeli embassy late this afternoon for that the JCRC put together last minute. They found out that Israel's Minister of Defense, he's only been the Minister of Defense for the past 2 months, Naftali Bennett, was in town and was willing to, because he used to be the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, was willing to meet with Jewish leaders. So since I'm on JCRC's email list, yesterday morning, got an email saying tomorrow, meaning today, at 4:30 to 5:30, you're invited to the Israeli embassy to hear Naftali Bennett speak off the record about Minister of Defense related items, which would be interesting since the Trump peace plan would be a Minister of Defense related item. So since I was one of 2 rabbis in attendance, Ron Halber asked me if I would conclude the session by leading everyone in the prayer for Israel. So I didn't have a prayer book on me, but I knew how to find it on the phone. So I go up there, and in the prayer is to ask God to protect the ministers of the Israel's government, and Naftali Bennett is standing right here, 1 foot next to me as I'm saying that. So that's pretty exciting. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with Naftali Bennett and his policies, but it was exciting to do that. So I recite the prayer in Hebrew and English, as we're used to from Shabbat morning. I step aside, and Naftali Bennett says, now I want to recite the Mishnah Berach for the Israeli soldiers. And he starts looking for it on his phone. But I had it right there. The same place that I found the prayer for the state of Israel had a thing, click here for the prayer for the soldiers. So I clicked, showed it to him, and he read from my iPhone the prayer for the Israeli soldiers. That was only in Israel, and Israeli embassy is Israel territory, so only in Israel could something like that happen. So that was fun. Okay, sorry to waste 4 minutes of your time with this. But that was exciting for me. Today, I wanted to talk about Daf Yomi, and the title of this monthly class is Contemporary Jewish Issues. And some might argue that Daf Yomi, the cycle of studying 1 page a day of the Talmud, is not necessarily a contemporary issue. And I want to argue this evening that it is. I made a handout, and so for those of you watching, and whenever you watch, whether it's live this evening or whenever, if you want a copy of the handout, just email me, and I can send it to you as an attachment. but otherwise listen in to what I want to share. So, if we don't know, back in the 1920s, there was a rabbi who instituted the concept of studying a page of Talmud a day. In his mind, it was an opportunity to encourage people to study Talmud and ensure that people would study it and that it would stay relevant for the Jewish community. Obviously, it's mostly something that is done within the Orthodox and especially in the ultra-Orthodox community. It takes 7.5 years. There are 20 volumes of Talmud based on the traditional way the Talmud is published. There are a number of ways to publish it today, but the traditional publication and setup of the page of the Talmud was from the Ram publishing family, a Jewish family from Vilna, Lithuania, back in the 1700s. Before that, the Talmud was situated at all. So let me back up because I was about to say something and I realized that you need to understand the Talmud as we know it is a combination of two books that were edited from oral traditions. The Mishnah is a 6-volume work of Jewish law, the very first one, edited by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince or President of the Rabbinical Academy, 1,800 years ago in the land of Israel. And he edited 300 years worth of oral rabbinic tradition into the 6 volumes that we know it, known as the Mishnah. Those 6 volumes are agricultural laws, the first tractate being blessings, and the rest of it agricultural law as it relates to the land of Israel. The second volume are festivals. The third volume is, I always get this messed up, and my teacher, may he rest in peace, Dov Zlotnick, would fail me. I know the acronym, and that's in my head. So it's either women or civil law. So those are volumes 3 and 4. Volume 5 deals with sacrifices, and volume 6 deals with ritual purity. Of those 6 volumes, the rabbis kept on studying Torah and studying Mishnah for the next 200 years in the land of Israel, and they edited then the Israeli version of the Talmud. And 100 years after that, so 300 years after the Mishnah in Babylonia, is the Babylonian Talmud, which, when you say Talmud, that's the default Talmud. 300 more years of study. So that 300 years worth after the Mishnah is known as Gemara, Mishnah, and Gemara make Talmud. Talmud is 20 volumes, really only on half of the Mishnah. Okay, so of the agricultural law, there's nothing in the Babylonian Talmud. There is everything in the Israeli Talmud, because agricultural law only applies to the land of Israel. So the sabbatical year in which you let the land lie fallow, that only applies to the land of Israel, doesn't apply outside the land of Israel. So Babylonian rabbis, they studied those laws, but they didn't edit them and include them in the Babylonian Talmud because we're outside of the land of Israel. So the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud starts with blessings and then goes to festivals and then does the entire festivals, does the entire women, does the entire civil law. It does maybe 1 or 2 tractates of sacrifices and 1 or 2 tractates of purity, and that's it for the entire 20 volumes of the Babylonian Talmud. The largest volume is Shabbat, since Shabbat is considered like the holiest day and the most commonly observed of all Jewish practices. So the section on Shabbat laws is the largest of all the sections. So it takes 7.5 years to study one page a day. A page is front and back of how the Talmud is printed. Takes 7.5 years to do that. That 7.5 year cycle ended around New Year's Day, January 1st this year, was I think the last day. No, that's when it was celebrated at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, 90,000 people. And there's a funny picture that was posted on Facebook. One person dressed like Waldo, like the Where's Waldo? So one person dressed like that, and a sea of black coats and black hats and pants. 90,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews and one dressed like Waldo. So that was kind of funny. But the cycle ended on Shabbat, January 3rd, and began immediately again the new cycle on January 4th. So the last go-round that just ended on January 3rd, there were people at that time, 7.5 years ago, who decided, who are not ultra-Orthodox, maybe they would take this on. So Eliza Kershan wrote a book called If All the Sea Were Ink. And it was a memoir of her study of the Daf Yomi for 7.5 years as it related to what was going on in her life. Her marital problems, her divorce, her remarriage, children, making aliyah, all of that. So if you just Google that, if you're interested in that kind of memoir as it relates to Talmud study, it's a fascinating book, and she's an excellent writer. So it's a fast read, If All the Sea Were Ink. Tablet, which is an online Jewish magazine, kind of human interest, kind of Jewish human interest story, kind of online magazine. I highly recommend that. You can get a daily email from Tablet for a variety of articles. One of their journalists is, I believe his name is Arthur Kirsch. Kirsch is the last name. Arthur might be the first name. I'm thinking of a member of our congregation, may he rest in peace, who was Arthur Kirsch, but it's something with an A, Aaron Kirsch. Maybe it's Aaron Kirsch. He decided, he was hired by Tablet to study, and every week he would write an article based on that week's, and they're archived now. And so he does it very interestingly from a non-Orthodox perspective about what the Talmud study meant. And so this go around, starting January 4th, I decided that I should do this. There are conservative rabbis who have undertaken this, and I just thought, you know what, let me try to do this and see how it goes. So I haven't been able to do it every single day, but I am caught up. So when I know that, and I'm doing it in Hebrew, and there's an app that I have on my phone called Daf Yomi, and it provides a variety of formats for reading the page. You can do it in the traditional page. Is all out, that it was printed, and the Talmud, the Gemara is written in outline form. So you need commentators to fill in the blanks of the outline, and that's mainly Rashi from 1,000 years ago, who filled in the blanks for everybody. Steinsaltz, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, wrote his edition of the Talmud, edited his edition of the Talmud, which incorporated Rashi into making it free-flowing, kind of easy Hebrew, relatively easy Hebrew to understand the text. So on this app, you can read it in the traditional text, you can read it in the Hebrew Steinsaltz, or you can read it vocalized with the vowels, so that is with the vowels, and you can read it in English in Steinsaltz. So all those options are available to you on that. And so I try to read, I'm taking notes as I read it, so I know I'll have a lot of pages of notes after I'm all done, the 7.5 years, if I make it. And so anyway, so far I'm keeping, we're on page 34, I think, of Barachot, which means blessings. That's the first tractate of the Talmud. So what I thought we would do this evening, so now I'm looking at the chat on the side, and thanks to my father, Rabbi Robert Lehman, for writing in to say that volume 3 of the Mishnah is Nashim, is women, and volume 4 is Nezikin, which is Salah. Okay. May my father live to 120, so that I know I can rely on somebody else to correct me, and I'm sure he's cracking up right now as he's listening to this. No, I'm not going to repeat that for those. So, okay. So what I have in a handout this evening, and again, somebody else wrote in, it's hard to hear the sound cuts in and out. Again, I'm apologizing that the microphone is just not, my laptop is not working well. What I wanted to do is share a variety of texts that appear in the first 34 pages that will give us a sense of what the Talmud is about and how I think the Talmud is relevant. So I have the handout that people who are here have in front of them. And like I said, if you want, those of you watching want a copy of this, just email me and I can send it to you. So the very first, every section of Talmud begins, every volume of Talmud begins on page 2. It does not begin on page 1. I don't know why. That's just the way it is. So, and it's every page is that page. So 2, it's A and B. That's how it's referred to. So from page 2B, the Talmud begins with a discussion of when we can start saying the Shema in the evening. So the classic conversation about the beginning of the Talmud is all about how the Talmud and why the Talmud begins with that thought. If you were starting to write the Talmud, which would be a summary of Jewish law and Jewish practice for the Jewish community, what do you think you would begin the Talmud with? What would be the first question that you would have in mind? Something about Shabbat, maybe? Would it even be something more basic than that, more fundamental than that? So, excuse me? About Genesis. What about creation? Perhaps, maybe the Talmud would start with something with the creation of the world. But remember, the Talmud is about Jewish law and practice. So not necessarily about theology. There is an underlying basis for Jewish law and practice. So if you were going to write a book about Jewish law and practice, how would you begin the book? Perhaps with the Ten Commandments, or even more basic than that, start explaining why it is that there is such a thing as Jewish law and practice. Okay, so the Talmud does not begin with that. It assumes that we know that there is Jewish law and practice. And so if it's going to start with Jewish law and practice, it would start with something that you would do when the day begins. And so if it's starting with, when do you say the Shema in the evening? Well, we know then that the Jewish day begins in the evening. And in fact, right after it does that, the Talmud explains why the day begins in the evening in saying that in Bereshit, in chapter 1 of Genesis, it says, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1, etc. through day 7 through Shabbat. So since it starts in the Torah, day in the evening and in the morning, people traditionally study the Talmud. If the Torah says in the evening and the morning, people traditionally study the Talmud. If the Torah says in the evening and the morning, day 1, then that means the day begins in the evening. Okay, that's one thing to learn from the beginning of the Talmud. The second thing is that we recite the Shema in the evening. Okay, well, right. The Talmud didn't tell us already that we need to pray times a day, but we'll get to that. But they start right into it. They dive right in with these assumptions. So now, I wanted to share with you just this one paragraph from that discussion about when we say the Shema in the evening by saying, in our Mishnah, the Master said. So just as an aside, there are some technical terms that the Talmud uses that, like the Master said. When the Talmud says the Master said, that means the anonymous rabbi who is like the narrator of the Mishnah. So if there's no rabbi's name quoted, the anonymous rabbi is just called the master. So in our Mishnah, the master said the beginning of the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is from the time when the priests enter to partake of their teruma. The Gemara raises a contradiction to this opinion from a Baraita that states that the time for the recitation of the evening Shema is from when a poor person enters to eat his bread with salt until he rises from his meal. All right, so I wanted to include these 5 lines, and just as another aside, Baraita is Aramaic. Mostly the Talmud is written in Aramaic, a language similar to Hebrew, and written in Hebrew letters, but it's a different language. Baraita is Aramaic for outside. So a source from the time of the Mishnah, from 100 BCE to 200 CE, is a source that something that the rabbi said during that time that did not make it into the Mishnah is called a Baraita. So it's almost as authoritative as the Mishnah itself, but just not quite, because it wasn't published in the Mishnah. So anyway, we have 2 thoughts here about when the Shema is supposed to be recited in the evening. So in other words, for the rabbis, they don't have watches, and they have a concept that the day is divided into 24 hours, but it's not the sense of 60 minutes to an hour. And 24 hours is the 24 equal segments is the day, but it's not, each segment isn't necessarily 60 minutes. So for the rabbis, depending if it's in the winter time, daylight, there are always 12 daylight segments. Even though we don't have 12 60-minute segments of daylight hours in the wintertime. And in the wintertime, they would have 12 nighttime segments of night, even though there are more than 12 hours of nighttime in the wintertime today, right? The sunset was at around 5:15 today, and so that means it is dark at 6:15, and it won't be light tomorrow until like 7:30 in the morning. So that's like 13 hours of nighttime. But for the rabbis, that's still 12. That would be divided into 12 nighttime segments. So the 2 times that are presented here for reciting the Shema in the evening, the time when the priests enter to eat their truma. Truma is a technical term for the portion designated for them to eat as a gift. Like people were supposed to bring gifts to the temple, from which only the Kohanim, only the priests could eat of it. So one time to start saying the Shema is the time that the priests start eating their truma. Or the other suggested time is when poor people start to eat their bread with salt. So the question I have for you is that helpful to any of us? Do any of us know what time that is then? No, I'm thinking, what do you do on a fast day? Okay, so Saul says, no, it's not helpful, but what do you do on a fast day? So that's a good question, but the rabbis, it's not about the question is about all things being equal. The general idea is, when are we supposed to say the Shema in the evening? Okay, so it's not about technically when do you say it on a fast day, when do you say it on Rosh Hashanah, not that. The general term, if you want to know when to say the Shema in the evening, it's when the Kohen starts to go in to eat their truma, or when a poor person eats their bread with salt. So again, I raise the question, is that helpful to us? It's not helpful to us. Because why isn't it helpful to us? We don't know when everybody's doing everything. Okay, number one, we don't know when these people are doing that. And what's the issue with preceding their truma? Is that relevant today? It's not relevant today because the priests can only eat their truma if the temple is standing in Jerusalem? No temple, no priests. No temple, no sacrifices. No temple, no gifts that people are bringing to the temple. Therefore, Kohanim it doesn't apply. We live in a time without the temple in Jerusalem. The rabbis lived in a time without the temple in Jerusalem. So how did they know what time the priests went in to eat the truma? And not only that, why would they say that? Why would they teach us when the temple's not standing? Why would they teach us that that's the time to start saying the Shema? What do they want us to learn by using that as a time? Perhaps we understand then that the Shema is the replacement for the sacrifice. Okay, that's a possibility. What else could we learn from this? Why, if the rabbis want to make the Talmud practical for a guide to everyday life, how is using the Kohen eating truma a practical guide for the average Jew who isn't in Jerusalem? Let's say the temple is standing, who isn't in Jerusalem watching the Kohen. What do the rabbis want us to learn from teaching this? What? Perhaps it's dinner time. Perhaps, but they could have said dinner time. And they did offer that as an option when poor people eat dinner. Now, do poor people eat dinner at a different time than regular people, non-poor people eat dinner? I don't know, but it's possible that they do. Perhaps there's a time when the communal kitchen is open, that poor people will get their food from the communal kitchen, and then the kitchen closes, right? So let's say, just as an example, the communal kitchen, like here in our neighborhood, only help. It's not a communal kitchen, but it's a food pantry. Well, the food pantry isn't open 24/7. It's open, let's say, 10 to 5, right? Because it's run by volunteers. You can't have volunteers running a food pantry 24 hours a day. So people who need the food pantry know that they have to go between 10 and 5 to get their food. Same with a food kitchen. So if some food kitchens will have lunch, some food kitchens will have dinner, some will have both, right? We don't have that in our suburb, but in DC, there are places where homeless people and poor people can go to get a hot meal, either lunch or dinner. So by making these two as the possible times, we're learning the importance of our history. Even though the rabbis are living in a time without the temple in Jerusalem and creating a system that would be independent of the temple itself, they still want to be connected to the priests and make sure that we're connected to the priests and the work of the priests, because someday the temple is going to be rebuilt and the priests are going to eat their truma again. So one lesson we're learning from this, no matter, even in 2020, we still need to be thinking about the temple in Jerusalem and how it worked. And when we say the Shema, we need to be connected not just to our own individual spirituality, but understand history when we recite the Shema. That, as Adriana suggested, it's connected to sacrifices. But more than that, when we recite the Shema, we're connecting to when the priests were eating their truma in the temple in Jerusalem. And secondly, if we don't want to be connected to the temple and sacrifice, maybe we think that's barbaric, or we should still be connected to the poor in our community. And if we don't know when the poor are eating, well, that's a problem. We need to be connected to the disadvantaged and the poor in the community, and we need to be feeding them so that we actually know when the poor are eating. Okay, so by this innocuous statement that seems kind of out of place and disconnected, and that we have no connection to, we're learning that the rabbis are teaching us the importance of maintaining a connection to the temple and the importance of maintaining a connection to the poor. Okay, so that's what I wanted to bring from the first source. Okay, So as I know, as I always do, that was only source number one. That's only 5 lines. If you have the packet in front of you, you know that the other source is a lot longer. So, okay, I want to go to the longest one, which is on page 3 and page 4. Okay, and then if we have time for anything, which I doubt we will, we can look at the other two. So this is from pages 27b and 28a, which was last week's reading and last week's cycle of Daf Yomi pages. Okay, so here we have this fascinating story of a leadership struggle in the time of the rabbis. Okay, so let's understand how this works. There is a rabbinical academy, a main rabbinical academy that moved depending on where the Jews were living in the land of Israel, and depending on where the Romans were less likely to interrupt business and do acts of violence. So while the temple was being destroyed, there's a story later in the Talmud of how Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the leader of the rabbinic community, was able to convince Titus himself, the Arch of Titus that's outside of Colosseum in Rome. Still Titus himself, the Arch of Titus that's outside of Colosseum in Rome, still standing today. A graphic relief there, if you've ever been there, to see how the Roman soldiers are taking the loot of the temple in Jerusalem and bringing it to Rome. Okay, so Titus was at the feet of the Jews, the Jewish province of Judea, and sacked the temple and brought all the gold vessels. And you can see that at the Arch of Titus today. So that is Yochanan ben Zakkai convinced him to allow the Jews to set up shop in Yavne. And Titus, now if the Romans wanted to totally annihilate the Jews, Titus should have said no. Had he said no, we would not be here today. But fortunately, he said yes, set up shop in Yavne, which, if it's the same town, it's south of Tel Aviv, north of Ashkelon, a little bit inland from the coast. I just actually sent a package to Yavne yesterday. Okay, so that could be the same Yavne, maybe not. I don't know if the community of Yavne that's in Israel today is the very same Yavne, but I think it's somewhere on the coast there, away from trouble in the capital in Jerusalem. And from Yavne, it went to Usha, or to Sipori in the north in the Galilee, and then to Usha, and then to Tiberias. So there was a rabbinical academy through the 700s, 800s in Israel. By the end in Tiberias. That's why Tiberias, which is a beautiful city on the coast of the Sea of Galilee, a tourist spot today, is one of the 4 holy cities in Israel. Tiberias, Tzfat, Safed, Jerusalem, and Hebron. Safed, Jerusalem, and Hebron are considered the 4 holy cities. Okay, so there's a rabbinical academy, and these rabbinical academies, that's where Jewish law was interpreted and decided. And there was always a head of the academy, the Nasi. Okay, so at this time, the story is about Rabbi Gamliel, Rabban, which means our Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Joshua. So there are stories about the two of them who were not friends and often had differences of opinion. And the fascinating thing about the Talmud is that it maintains the differences of opinions. So it's not just a Reader's Digest, which is just the bottom line, this is what the law is. It's about the discussion, so that, speaking as a conservative Jew, so that these discussions can continue in every generation, and it's possible that the minority opinion could become majority. Okay, so the discussion here in this story is the sages taught. There was an incident involving a student who came before Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Joshua. The student said to him, "Is the evening prayer optional or obligatory. All right, we're not going to go there about that. The evening service is obligatory today based on this story, the Talmud, and also what was said before it. But there was a discussion about that. It wasn't a question about the morning or the afternoon service, just a question about the evening service. Is it optional or obligatory? Rabbi Joshua said to him, it's optional. Okay? The same came before Rabban Gamliel and said to him, is the evening prayer optional or obligatory? Rabban Gamliel said to him, obligatory. Oh, the president of the Sanhedrin says it's obligatory. Rabbi Joshua, who is a force to be reckoned with, okay? He's an important rabbi that other rabbis respect. No matter whether they're on Gamliel's side or optional, Gamliel, the head, says it's obligatory. The student said to Rabban Gamliel, this is where the trouble begins. But didn't Rabbi Joshua tell me that the evening prayer is optional? Gamliel doesn't like to hear that. How could it be that somebody would disagree with him? He's arrogant sometimes, Gamliel, as the story plays out. Rabban Gamliel said to the student, wait until the masters of the shields, which is a reference to the Torah scholars who battle for Torah, enter the study hall, at which point we'll discuss the issue. So it's not a private conversation anymore between student and rabbi. Rabbi Gamliel wants to make this into a public discussion. Okay, so he has an agenda in mind. And what's his agenda? When the masters of the shields, that is the Torah scholars, entered the army, the questioner stood before everyone present and asked, is the evening prayer optional or obligatory? Gamliel said to him, obligatory. Waiting to see if anybody's going to disagree with him. If anybody would dare speak up and disagree with the head of the Rabbinical Academy. Okay? Rabbi Gamliel, in order to ascertain whether or not Rabbi Joshua still maintained his opinion, Rabbi Gamliel said to the sages, is there any person who disputes this matter? Right, so Rabbi Gamliel is taunting the audience there. Anybody dare to disagree with me? And I'm adding, me, the head of the Sanhedrin, the president of the academy. Anybody dare disagree with my approach here? Rabbi Joshua said to him, no. So, in other words, in private, to this student, Joshua says, I think it's optional. But in the academy, hearing what the president says it's mandatory. Joshua's not willing to disagree. Okay, I can be convinced. I trust Gamliel and his method of study. I'll go along with Gamliel. Gamliel wasn't satisfied that Joshua didn't say anything. No, he said, in deference to the Nasi, this is what Steinsaltz adds, he did not wish to argue with him publicly. Rabban Gamliel said to Joshua, but was it not in your name that they told me that the evening prayer is optional? So now he's putting him on the spot. Okay, so this is how Gamliel said to Joshua, Joshua, stand on your feet, and they will testify against you. Rabbi Joshua stood on his feet and said, if I were alive and a student were dead, the living cannot contradict the dead. It can contradict the dead, and I could deny issuing that ruling, right? So if this student had died, then, you got me alive, that's a dead student, who are you going to believe? And if I'm saying that I didn't say anything, then you have to believe me. But now that I'm alive and he's alive, how can the living contradict the living? In other words, he didn't say, yes, I said that. He said, I can't contradict that student who was saying that. So it's not, so in other words, he's not publicly disagreeing with Rabban Gamliel. He's kind of saying it in a very diplomatic, political way. I can't contradict what that student is saying. So, right, it's still the truth, but he's being nice about it. But Gamliel's not giving up. Okay, so I have no choice but to admit that I said. In the meantime, Rabban Gamliel, as the Nasi, was sitting and lecturing, so he goes on, and Joshua's still standing. Gamliel still is teaching. He's sitting and lecturing, comfortable. Joshua is standing on a dirt floor, uncomfortable. And Rabbi Joshua all the while was standing on his feet because Rabban Gamliel did not instruct him to sit. right? Out of deference for the president, until the president tells you to sit, or a judge in court, please be seated, the bailiff says that, or the judge says that, you're supposed to stand. So Gamliel didn't say sit down, so Joshua's standing. And Gamliel's going about his business, teaching other things, lecturing, whatever. This continued for some time until it aroused great resentment against Rabban Gamliel. And all the people assembled began murmuring and said to Chutzpit the disseminator. Okay, so let me explain that who Chutzpit the disseminator is. Sometimes there were no such thing as tape recorders back then. So if someone teaching from about a Mishnah needed to recall a Mishnah, they would go to a disseminator and say, quote back to me. And people's jobs were to have those with photographic memories would recall it and quote it back. Throughout the Talmud, you have citations of rabbis that say, some say it was Rabbi so-and-so, some say it was Rabbi so-and-so. The names are similar, but you could see how people are not sure, based on the oral tradition from one generation to the next, how it could have changed. So these disseminators are supposed to remember things as perfectly as possible without adding their own commentary to it. You don't want a disseminator who is also a Talmud scholar who would add their interpretation to it and possibly change the format of what they're supposed to remember. So the human tape recorders are just that, without any added thought to it. So people assembled, began murmuring, and said to Chutzpit the disseminator, stop conveying Rabbi Gamliel's lecture, and he stopped. So if Chutzpit's not working, then it's like you're doing a boycott of the session. Gamliel can't keep teaching. If nobody's humanly recording, then you can't have the session going on. So all the rabbis present were protesting Gamliel having the chutzpah, of keeping Joshua on his feet. And they are boycotting Gamliel, but they say, shut up, Gamliel, how dare you do this? They're doing it also in a more delicate way by getting the disseminator to stop doing his work. If he stops doing his work, Gamliel will get the message, I'm supposed to stop, I'm doing something wrong. Because he's like repeating it. So Rabbi Gamliel just want to make sure that you're teaching this and I have it right. And so those people would then be saying that, and Gamliel would say, yes, you have it right. And if he stopped, then Gamliel can't keep going, because they knew this is how the oral tradition would keep going. Okay, there's a whole other question about why they weren't writing things down, but their thought was only the Torah should be in writing, everything else should be orally. So why was the Mishnah written? Because the Jewish community was in turmoil and in transition. The land of Israel around 200. More Jews are moving to Babylonia. Better write it down to make sure we remember it. But they did it with great trepidation and caution. So they didn't really want to write things down. They had these human tape recorders instead. Okay. The Gemara relates that in their murmuring, they said, how long will Rabban Gamliel continue afflicting him? That is Rabbi Joshua. And then they recall a story. Last year in Rosh Hashanah, he afflicted him. That Rabban Gamliel ordered Rabbi Joshua to come to him carrying his staff and bag on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred, according to Rabbi Joshua's calculations. Only means there was a question about when Rosh Hashanah was supposed to be, whether it was on one day or the next day, based on the moon. Joshua thought it was one day. Gamliel thought it was a different day. If it's 2 different days, then Yom Kippur is a different day, right? Because everything is dependent upon Rosh Hashanah. So Gamliel, with his chutzpah, made Joshua, on Joshua's calculation of when Joshua thought Yom Kippur was, come to the academy, not be praying and fasting on Yom Kippur, but Joshua was still doing that, but made him come to the academy to prove that Gamliel's right, Joshua's wrong. So he already had a history of doing this to Joshua, and he's doing it again here. And then there was another story in which we don't need to get into that. There's a couple of lines, but he was afflicting somebody else. So enough of Gamliel afflicting people. We don't want this in our president. Okay, yes, I knew that would get some comments, and it's just about Gamliel. It's not about any other president. But the rabbis are saying the president of the Rabbinical Academy is supposed to have deference to other students and teachers, and is supposed to not be arrogant. Okay? And to treat people with respect. So now I do ... because the story goes on about how they're choosing somebody else, Rabbi Eliezer, and it's in the Haggadah when Rabbi Eliezer says, I was as if I was 70 years old, and I had learned about the Exodus from Egypt. Right? That's in the Haggadah there before that lengthy Midrash section in the Haggadah. So they question, what does that mean? Like 70 years old? Well, apparently, according to the story, the part that we're missing, that I left out on purpose, was that Eliezer was 18 years old. They chose him to be the head of the academy, to take Gamliel's place. And in order to look the part, because an 18-year-old doesn't look like a Talmud scholar yet, miraculously 18 rows of his hair turned white. And that made him look like as if he were 70 years old, because he had white hair on his head then. Okay, so it was all about that. And then how did Gamliel, and then how did Eliezer, what was the academy like while Eliezer was in charge? And now Gamliel and Joshua Gamliel's still in the academy, not the president, still participating in deliberations. Okay, and Gamliel sees that Joshua is still being listened to by the other scholars. And this is how the story ends. Rabbi Gamliel said to himself, since this is a situation that the people are following Rabbi Joshua, apparently he was right. So Gamliel could not see in his own arrogance that somebody else's opinion could be the better opinion. The opinion that most scholars agree with in terms of their methodology of how they're deriving the law based on the interpretation. And so what we see throughout the Talmud is by maintaining the majority-minority opinions, the rabbis are explaining how each opinion derives its opinion, and usually the majority opinion is the one that makes most sense to people in how the verse is being interpreted and the logic being applied to that interpretation. So it's the verse and the logic that are required in order to make something an acceptable interpretation. Okay, and that Joshua, for the most part, his logic and his methodology is more sensible than Gamliel's, and Gamliel finally realizes it. Therefore, it be appropriate for me, Gamliel, to go and appease Rabbi Joshua, meaning ask for forgiveness. When he reached Rabbi Joshua's house, he saw that the walls of Joshua's house were black. Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Joshua in wonderment, from the walls of your house, it's apparent that you are a blacksmith. As until then, he had no idea that Rabbi Joshua was forced to engage in that arduous trade in order to make a living. Rabbi Joshua said to him, woe unto a generation that you are its leader, as you are unaware of the difficulties of Torah scholars, how they make a living, and how they feed themselves. So, there are 4 more lines to the story about how Joshua finally forgives Gamliel, but that I was very taken with that line, because that line makes the story relevant for generations. Whether we think what we think about the story about whether the evening service is obligatory or optional, that you could see that that's irrelevant to our lives today, whether we pray or not. Or if we think that we want to pray, that it should be spontaneous and that we should pray whenever we want. Whatever it is, okay, you can understand that possibly this could be irrelevant to a modern Jew. But what makes this story relevant is not necessarily the details of the argument and the legal principle itself. It's rather, if you're in charge of the academy, you got to know who your students are and who your colleagues are. You can't just think arrogantly enough, I am the president and everybody should be listening to me, and I could care less if people are here or not. I was elected and therefore I'm in charge. Rather, Joshua said, how is it that Gamaliel did not know that Joshua was a blacksmith? That is inexcusable. And not only because he's a blacksmith, the blacksmith is such a hard job to have. It's a sweating job. It's backbreaking job, and it's possible that it's not a well-paying job. So he's living in poverty, and despite working as a blacksmith, he's also a Torah scholar, and he finds the time to make it to the academy. That's Joshua. So how is it that Gamaliel doesn't know that? That's what the rabbis in teaching this story. Did the story happen? We have no idea. A lot of the stories in the Talmud, we have no idea whether they're accurate or not. So most of the stories in the Talmud are written in order to teach a lesson. So whether Gamaliel and Joshua existed doesn't matter. Whether the story actually happened doesn't matter. The point of the story is this line: woe unto a generation when its leader is unaware of the difficulties of the Torah scholars themselves and how they make a living and how they feed themselves. So this is a lesson on how teachers should be aware of who their students are, and in order to make a difference in the life, that the teacher's job is to be aware of where their students are coming from and to know when students are having difficulty, not having difficulty, what their background is, and be able to then connect to them because they know them and who they are. So this is a lesson to all teachers today, and that's why I think that this story is relevant too. So it's 8:40, and I think that these stories are enough for us to understand. The other two stories are fascinating stories about what the rabbis thought about God and what the rabbis thought about the King Hezekiah and the prophet at that time, Isaiah, and their relationships. I suggest that you read those two stories too, just to get a sense of that. And perhaps another time we can look at those stories. So have a good evening, everyone. Unless there are questions or comments here. Yes, David.
I think for leaders, key one here. Teacher.
Okay. So so David's making the point that leaders too. So yes, that would be the ideal. That a leader, so you would say a political leader, should know his or her citizens and where they're coming from. And the same could apply. A leader should not be so arrogant to think that they're stuck in their castle or their office without ever walking outside and without caring about who the people are. Right. So yes, it could absolutely apply to anybody in charge. Everybody in charge, for them to be an effective leader, according to this, an important characteristic is knowing your citizens. Yes, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Yes. If Gamaliel, yes, it would be the same Gamaliel from that.
So how did he end up in the Seder?
How did he end up in the Seder? Yeah, so they got these rabbis. So Rabbi Gamaliel, Joshua, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, they're all from a time that's about 60 to 70 years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, around the time of what's known as the Bar Kokhba revolt. So if we thought that the emperor at the time of General Titus at 70 was bad, Emperor Hadrian at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE was worse because the temple was destroyed but was left in ruins. In the year 70, Hadrian cleared the whole area and built a pagan temple on that in response to the revolt of the Jews at that time. And Rabbi Akiva was a backer of Bar Kokhba, the non-rabbi leader of the rebellion, to the point that he thought that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. So it's that generation that really made Judaism as we know it. And the Haggadah is the one main rabbinic text that most Jews are familiar with outside of the prayer book, right? Because Jewish demographic surveys of the American Jewish community show that over 80% of the Jewish community has some kind of Seder. And whatever kind of Seder it is, you're doing a song or two for the Haggadah, if nothing else. And it's possible you come across these rabbis' names. So that's how people know these rabbis. It's that generation. It was a key generation in the transformation of Israelite religion to Judaism as we know it. And even though Gamliel had these characteristics, he was still the president of the Sanhedrin, and the rabbis are trying to make sense of this arrogant guy who ends up being president. What in this section that I deleted also the importance of pedigree, and Gamliel is related to important people, and Eliezer also was related to important people. So of all the rabbis that are trying to come up with as a replacement to Gamliel, they come up with Eliezer. Why? Because he's rich at 18. He's still independently wealthy. He's related to Ezra, who was a leader of the community when they came back from Babylonia and encouraged the people to build the temple. So he was instrumental in Jewish history, and he was quite knowledgeable. At 18, he was like this boy wonder. So he had those three characteristics. That's why Eliezer, but he was young, so they made a miracle that he got white hair. Okay, so and then after Gamliel gets forgiveness from Joshua, Gamliel and Eliezer still are co-presidents. So Eliezer's president for 3 weeks out of 4, and Gamliel's the 4th week. So they share the load for a while. Yeah.
So you're teaching us that the question of whether it's evening service is obligatory or optional is not the story.
Right.
When did that become?
So Saul's question about, so I said in relating this story that whether the evening service is obligatory or optional isn't the point of the story. It comes in the midst of the discussion about whether the evening service is optional or obligatory. Okay, so it's a lengthier discussion. This story is just one example. The editor of the Talmud said, here's this story about the obligatory optional. I'll put the story here in this legal discussion about optional or obligatory. The answer is it's obligatory, obviously, since we just had the evening service, and it's yes, we need to do it. So the conversation is why is it obligatory? But that's not the issue here. The issue here in this story is to teach us about the characteristics of the personalities of Gamliel and Joshua. And Joshua, poor blacksmith, still a knowledgeable guy, still able to out-teach Gamliel, the president of the Sanhedrin. And that it doesn't matter your pedigree, and it doesn't matter your wealth. What matters is your knowledge and your personality. That's the point of this story. Okay? But it just so happens it mentions evening service. So the editor put it here in a discussion about the evening service. Any other thoughts or comments? Will I do a couple more of these? So we'll see. I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will over the 7.5 years coming up, God willing. That we're all stay healthy. I'm sure I will do this a few more times. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
So when you're studying the evening,
Yeah.